Alright, so someone posted a comment on the last video saying how the penny dropped or something clarified in regards to what I was talking about, pointing to the augmentations, pointing to the absence of any real separation, the absence of any real multitude of inherently existing separate objects in the senses. And it's something it's kind of like, when it clarifies, it becomes very obvious. But it's obvious in a very strange way, in a way that it's like so simplistic that it doesn't need to be confirmed from that point of view. So I was describing how, again, there so happens to be, let's use something else actually. Let's use this phone screen. So on the phone screen I'm looking at right now, there's an image of the inside of a car appearing on a flat screen. And that flat screen is the one screen. That screen appears within the visual field. So on this one flat screen, there are colours or shapes, there's movement. But it's just a flat screen. It's just a bunch of colours and shapes. The colours and shapes aren't separate from the screen. Nothing appearing as, a person in a car on this screen is clearly just a flat screen. None of it's separate from the screen, but the mind augments an interpretation of what's being seen onto the screen, and it lays these symbolic designations or these augmentations over the screen to make it look like, or to have it be understood as there's a individual person sitting in the centre here, distinct from the totality of the rest of the screen. So when we're looking at, so it's the mind that's doing that, it's the mind that's adding in that separateness and that those symbolic suggestions about what this is. So everyone who's watching this is watching it on a screen. There's no distance here on the screen, right? Like, sweaty as fuck. There's no distance here on the screen. There's a change in the colour and the shape, seemingly, to give the impression of moving closer and moving further away. What's happening on the screen is just this in as an aspect, as a single separate aspect of this total, is changing within that total. So can this be separated out from the screen? Can I present this separately from the totality of the background of the entire screen? So all of this is one scene, one image on this screen. So now we're going to notice that the screen is an appearance of a seemingly separate distinct object within the field of seeing, the field of vision. It's very similar to what we were just describing, like on this flat screen. The mind interprets or augments a symbolic understanding or meaning onto the scene. So just like on the screen, there is one scene, there's one image. It's not even one, but for talking's sake, I'm going to call it one image. Seemingly appearing within that one seeing are a multitude of distinct, discrete, separate and with their own existence objects. But none of that can be separated out ultimately from the totality of the seen world, the appearance. So none of it's ever actually separate. What suggests the separateness is an augmentation of mind, an interpretation, which is thought, that lays over or lays into and onto the visual sense symbolic representations of what this is based on learned memory, based on cognition. So when you see this, right, when you notice this, then you can start exploring it, so to speak. And when you notice one assumption, like there are multiple objects, when you notice that augmentation, then you can see through that, in a sense. The reality of that suggestion loses its power, and you can see through that into what is there in a complete sense, what is there in the non-dual sense. And that's not something that you can describe, because the language is a tool to be able to relate to these augmentations and relate to the relative world from that subjective position. So we're kind of dilating out our focus of attention from objects, a car, house, lamppost, tree, and we're noticing the totality of the visual sense of the scene. And then we start to look for what's not just the scene, what isn't there in the scene. So what isn't there in the scene is distance. So this invisible space between me and that tree. Like, you can't see it. It doesn't exist. But there's a thought interpretation making it seem like I'm the subject here looking out at the object out there. And it assumes this space in between that's a real thing. But in the scene, it's just not there. It's simply just not there. It's clearly not there. So that's why you hear people talk about this, and they say they experience themselves as the subject and the object at the same time, and both and neither. Or they say there's no inside, there's no outside, there's no over there, there's no over here. In the scene, there's just the scene. And what holds that all together is this assumption that I'm in here looking out. I'm in here behind the eyes looking out of this invisible window, projecting my awareness out, independent of the objective world, projecting it out onto that objective world that's out there separate from me. So that simply isn't in the non-dual sense, that simply isn't the experience. So there are a number of ways that you can tune into to this, so to speak, or relax these augmentations. And for me, the most powerful one was to seemingly look back from the outside in. So this assumption that I'm looking out through this space onto an objective world, turning that around, so to speak, which doesn't happen. The augmentation that makes it look like there's distance and separation there just relaxes. But looking back through this point, the center point of looking, to see where does this start and where does this stop. And we can see that there is no start and stop point, but that's not a conclusion about the way it is. You can maybe even say it goes on infinitely, but again, that's not a conclusion about the way it is, because this isn't a subjective experience. So you can then dilate the focus of attention. So there's this center focal point that we seem to be looking at, that is the focus of attention that we look, and the most, let's say, important point of focus will be what we're looking directly at. And as we come out to the peripheral, this augmentation starts to relax. It's most prominent in the center of the visual field. So we can start to relax the focus of attention out from that center point to the peripheral. And notice that the image, the appearance is still there, but the augmentation that's making it look like what you think it is loses its definition, and we can move it around, and we can do this in an unfamiliar space. So I know there's a blue car to the right of me. In the peripheral there's less definition, so that it just looks like vague shapes and colours. It looks like a vague appearance without distinction in different parts, different objects. But as I turn, the augmentation kicks in, and it gives me a full symbolic representation of what I think that is from this point of view. And then it's even like the colours and the shapes. So when it's no like heavy designation like grey Volkswagen, this type of tree, red brick wall, when that relaxes out a bit, it's just colours and shapes. But then even the designations, the augmentations, colours and shapes, are replaced with the pure experience, the pure sense. Which don't have distinct colours or distinct shapes. It's just a mysterious and fascinating display of appearance. Like, you can't even describe what, like, it's not possible to describe it. It's too complete. There aren't parts to it. When the point of view, the subjective point of view that feels the need to describe this and feels the need to interpret this is kind of forgotten about and replaced by the pure direct sense, that the simplicity in that, the completeness in that, isn't something the mind can understand, so it doesn't seem to be comfortable there. This habit force will keep returning, and the interpretation is so quick and automatic. But that fades out, and you can kind of like defocus that augmentation. And then the sense, the scene, replaces that central position. So then it no longer seems like a person looking out at the world. It's just an appearance, immediately aware of itself as itself, with no form. There's no relativity to be able to compare anything to anything else. So it's of infinite size and dimension, but at the same time of zero dimension. That's why I frequently use the phrase zero dimensional. It's like out with dimensionality. And within that, the dimensions appear. The thought augmentation that makes this relative world look like it does is it as well. So we don't have to resist that, we just see it for what it is. There's just clarity that arises. So the other augmentations are the distinctions between the senses. As in, there's like this bundle, this cluster of sensation at the center of experience, with a thought augmentation holding it together to make it seem like I am a limited body here, operating within, as an agent moving around within this much larger external world. These are just framings. None of that exists in the direct sense out with a thought augmentation. So then when you see the tree, the leaves blowing, and you hear the leaves blowing in the wind, when we drop all of those designations, then you see the sound, in a sense. You hear the image, the appearance, the scene, and at the same time the sensation of the body feels it completely. So you can feel the tree. Or you could even see that you are it. So that tree is what you are communicating with itself in absolute immediacy, without any separation. So it's like all together in a way that's it's impossible to comprehend, but can be experienced directly. Like this these eyeballs only exist due to the conditions of their environment, let's say. They're only here seeing because of the sun, because of the reflection of light, because of the image appearing simultaneously with the equipment of the eyeball. So the seen world is not separate from the eyeball, if that makes any sense. It all codependently arises together. All the conditions happening at the same time. And this eyeball is only functioning due to a fine balance of homeostasis in the body because of food, which then grows from the tree that's being looked at, and so on. And you could go on and on thinking about this, and it's a nice thought experiment, but the direct experience of that is clear. That none of this is separate. It's all mushed in together. And this cluster of sensations becomes like exploded out into away from this center point, into the totality of experience, which doesn't have any dimensions. So the sense of self bleeds out into the environment. The environment bleeds in through the sense doors to the point where the self can't be found anymore as anything other than a transient thought. So then the way this moves as a framing of time and relativity, when we walk down the street, we appear to be an individual entity moving down, moving through an external environment. So I'm here in this body distinct from the environment. I'm moving through it. The environment's static. And I'm the one in motion separate from the environment. But in the direct sense, that's not what's happening. The environment seems to be moving within itself. Or there's a point, at some point it seems like what you are, awareness, let's say, just to give it a name, the environment is moving through you. So you become like the static awareness through which the environment passes. And then even that interpretation falls away, and it is replaced by, I can't really describe it, so I'm not going to bother. But you can look in your experience and see. So it just gets more and more simple, and the more simple it gets, the more fascinating it becomes. And it becomes like the ultimate hobby that you don't need anything for, and you have infinite access to, and you can do constantly whenever you like. It's like the most fascinating thing possible, an exploration of experience. Without those beliefs and the way it is, and those thought augmentations in the road, so to speak, this infinite exploration of experiencing itself as this in immediacy can be continually enjoyed, continually engaged in, without any sort of agenda other than just the experience, just the pure existence, the pure presence of it, the joy that's inherent within experience as it is. And then the most simple of things, like I'm gonna walk to work from my car, and the walk to work will just be like profound and beautiful display of like impossible magic. But that's not limited to the walk to work. It's like this sense of awe in itself of how can this be? But the question is answered with the direct sense experience. It's here all the time. So that framing of mind then gives rise to the most incredible gift of experience that once was the curse. The curse of the question of what is this becomes how can this be? This is incredible. So then that relative mind pushes itself, is pushed to the limit, and that limit becomes so enjoyable in a way that's quite hard to describe. It's like magic. That's what it's like. It's like magic. It's like an infinite, profound magic trick that reality is playing on itself. But there's a profound peace and a profound rest within it. So when this what's inherent is discovered, it almost invalidates a lot of the importance of the quest for awakening, or the push for the movement towards enlightenment and so on. And it's replaced with the simplicity of just this as it is, as it always has been. And that's when we see that there isn't an end to awakening. Like, that's when we kind of see that awakening isn't a thing, that it was removing the layers of these assumptions that made it seem like we had to wake up. And that thing wakes up into itself, which is already awake and already non-dual, and then that's it. So I was talking to someone through email recently who was describing some clear non-dual realization, and then describing how that is leading to the insight of anatta, the no self realization, which kind of is distinct in a way from this whole process up until that point, and that there's no character in it. There's no me doing it, there's no awakening, there's no path. But what also becomes clear is that this isn't a thing for the one who's doing it, the person. And it's not an instant refinement of character. It's not an instant cure to all problems, cure to all intense experience. And that kind of shock that this wasn't what the character thought it was going to be, and there's nothing left to look for, there's nothing left to clarify and attain. That kind of shock is only forgotten about. It's never reconciled by its own terms. It's only ever forgotten about due to the profound immediate beauty of the direct sense that is complete, and it carries this whole thing infinitely into itself. And at that point, it's no longer possible to re-engage in any real way, any felt to be real way, with that fundamental viewpoint of me. So then begins, I think this practice is called metta, a lifelong healing, I guess you could say. or lifelong refinement of character into the relative world, let's say. Whilst at the same time that's clear. What that is clear. What this is clear. It's no longer back and forth or in and out. It's complete. So then there's no way to hide from anything anymore. And you inherit all of this as it. Totally. Which again can be overwhelming, but it's only overwhelming from a point of view, from that limits of that imagined separate entity. And I can tell you from experience that it never gets boring. Boredom doesn't exist anymore. Apathy, pointlessness, all that stuff at that point is gone. Because how can this be boring? Like, it's like hitting the jackpot, like the cosmic and infinite lottery in the most profound sense that you can imagine. But there's a price to pay for that. And the price is your life. Kind of an extreme way to say that. Let's say the price is the reality of your life as something that was inherently real and had inherent value apart from anything else. Yeah, I find myself having less and less to say to people now because there's so much clarity now, and everyone that I talk to and people that respond to these videos. I find myself having less to say because it's just like it's clear that this is just all clarifying. So like once we start sincerely looking into our experience, that's it really. It's the distractions from that are the thing. Once those distractions are discarded and we're sincerely looking into our experience, this awakening's nothing. Like, it's not a thing. It's not a elusive thing in the future, attainment on a pedestal over there somewhere else. It's just not a thing. Like, it's once the idea that it's a thing drops, awakeness is what it is, presence is what it is. But there's a process to that and the relative. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions or comments or on that or whatever, just drop them in and I'll use them to inform the next video. Anyway, I'm gonna go and I'll talk to you next time.